The first snow of December 1867 fell over the Indiana woods in a blanket so thick it muffled even the church bells of St. Bellamy's convent. Nestled at the edge of a forgotten pine forest, the convent was a place of silence, both in practice and in presence. Founded before the Civil War, it had survived on prayer, mystery, and the rare charity of Catholic patrons who preferred their good deeds buried in rural obscurity. It was not a place people sought out, and yet, on the fifth night of Advent, a figure stumbled from the tree line. A girl, barefoot, bleeding, and cradling something swaddled in torn linen. She collapsed just beyond the front steps, lips blue, eyes unfocused, whispering a name none of the sisters understood. Her skin was so pale she seemed part of the snowfall itself. When they carried her inside, the bundle in her arms began to unravel, revealing not one, but two stillborn infants, boys, identical, unmoving. Their skin bore no bruises, no signs of rot or trauma. They looked asleep. The sisters, trained in piety and midwifery, examined the bodies in silence. No breath, no warmth. Yet, their features were uncannily serene, almost knowing. The girl, no more than 16, called herself Ruth. She claimed the children were hers, though she would not name their father. Her voice quivered when she described the labor, how the boys hadn't cried, hadn't moved, but how she felt them watching her even as she pushed them into the cold silence of the world. The sisters prayed over the bodies and baptized them privately, naming them Elias and Ephraim. It was done more from obligation than faith. Stillborns were not usually christened, but something about their faces unsettled the nuns. They buried the boys at dawn behind the garden, near the broken statue of the Virgin Mary, whose hands had eroded with time. The ground was frozen. It took hours. When the coffins were low, red, the air grew strangely still. No birds, no wind. The sisters stood, heads bowed, unaware that Ruth had begun to smile from her bed. A soft, satisfied smile. She was humming a lullaby none of them had ever heard before. Ruth did not speak again for 3 days. She neither ate nor wept, nor acknowledged the sisters who came to check on her. She simply lay in her cot, staring at the frost-covered window that overlooked the rear garden. The garden itself was unremarkable, a patch of dying grass and crooked trees, now frozen stiff, with a rusting iron fence that separated the convent from the woods. But Ruth's eyes never left the small rise in the earth where the twins had been buried. Sister Miriam, the youngest and most sympathetic of the order, sat by her side and tried to coax her into prayer. "They're safe now," she said, though the words tasted hollow. Ruth blinked slowly, her lips barely moving. "They're not gone," she whispered. "They're just deeper now." That night, a strange silence settled over St. Bellamy's, not the usual hush of devout routine, but something colder, heavier. Sister Corinne, who oversaw the nursery despite it being long empty, was the first to notice the sound, breathing, thin, measured, too light to be from an adult. At first she assumed it was the wind, but the wind doesn't exhale in rhythm. When she entered the nursery, nothing appeared out of place, except the cradle. It was swaying, as if recently touched, and on the frost-lined floor beneath it, 4 parallel grooves ran 2 feet across the stone, like scratches, like fingernails. The sisters met privately that morning. They discussed grief, guilt, and the weight of spiritual burden. They decided not to tell the bishop, not yet, but they agreed to keep the nursery locked and to monitor Ruth closely. Still, the oddities grew. Candles left burning would be extinguished when no one was near. Prayer books vanished, only to be found arranged in pairs beneath the crucifix. One morning, Sister Agnes found the statue of St. Lucy with both eyes gouged from her porcelain face, clean, precise, as if by a razor. When Ruth was moved to the chapel for morning mass, she passed the hallway to the nursery and paused. Her eyes glazed over, and she whispered to no one in particular, "They're not angry yet, just cold." Then she smiled again, thin, unnatural, like someone else was smiling through her skin. The following week passed in a kind of slow, breathless limbo. Snowfall thickened, muffling the forest and cloaking the convent grounds in a white so dense it seemed to erase sound itself. The sisters resumed their routines with visible unease. Prayers grew shorter, silences stretched longer. No one mentioned Ruth's whispers or the nursery door, which now seemed to rattle faintly each night without cause. Sister Eileen, always skeptical, dismissed it as draught and superstition. "Death leaves traces," she said to Sister Martha over tea, "but ghosts are for Protestants and drunkards." Yet even Eileen flinched when the dining room bell rang at 3:17 a.m. with no one to pull its cord. Meanwhile, Ruth remained calm. Too calm. She had begun humming again, always the same tune, soft and circular, like something meant to soothe a newborn. Sister Miriam attempted to identify the melody, but nothing in the convent's hymnals matched. It was foreign, older, and Ruth only sang it when looking out toward the garden. On the 7th night after the burial, Sister Corinne found the nursery door ajar. She was certain it had been locked. Inside, the cradle swayed again. This time, the sheets were folded neatly, too neatly, and in the center lay a tiny handprint, pressed into the fabric like a bruise. No dirt, no blood, just a perfect impression, as if a baby had rested there briefly. The sisters gathered in the chapel and voted to exorcise the room. They fetched the crucifix, holy water, incense. Sister Agnes performed the rites. She spoke clearly, hands steady, voice unwavering, until the final phrase. The candle beside her went out. Her tongue froze mid-syllable, and her eyes rolled white for a full 10 seconds before she collapsed. The water in the font began to boil. They moved Ruth's cot to the infirmary, but she did not seem to notice. "They're listening," she said, voice hoarse. "They're not done." When asked who she meant, she only repeated, "They're deeper now." That night, Sister Miriam awoke to find her rosary twisted into a knot on her pillow. The crucifix was missing. On the inside of her window, drawn in frost, were two identical smiling faces, and beneath them, a single word: soon. By the 10th day, the convent's solemn rhythm had fractured beyond repair. Sleep became a fearful act. Even the most devout sisters began skipping evening prayers. The garden behind the convent, once merely neglected, now seemed to draw their eyes involuntarily. No birds landed there. No snow collected atop the burial mound, though every other inch of ground was white and thick. The sisters stopped tending it. No one dared enter the yard. Sister Eileen, determined to dispel what she called hysteria, volunteered to spend the night in the nursery. Armed with a lantern, her Bible, and a silver crucifix, she locked herself in just after Compline. What happened between the hours of midnight and dawn would never be spoken of directly, but the bruises around her neck, shaped like small hands, were visible for weeks. When asked what she saw, she only muttered, "They know we forgot." The following morning, all the hymnals were found open to Psalm 88. "I am counted among those who go down to the pit." The passage had been underlined, in ash. Sister Corinne tried to burn the crib that same afternoon. She poured lamp oil, struck a match, and set the wood ablaze. But instead of blackening, the cradle hissed, emitted a low groan, and extinguished itself without charring. That evening, the convent's bell tower rang 12 times at 2 a.m., though the rope had been cut during Lent and never repaired. That was the night Ruth began speaking in full sentences again. She asked for milk, then paused and asked if the twins were awake. Sister Miriam, stunned, asked what she meant. "They said it's almost time," Ruth replied. "They said we can all be family again if the door stays open." The door? No one understood, until Sister Martha found the iron key to the nursery missing from the Mother Superior's locked drawer. It was discovered the next morning, inside a jar of holy water in the chapel, bent into a spiral. That same morning, frost covered every mirror in the convent, except the one in the infirmary, which now bore a hand-drawn image in the corner. Two identical children, again smiling. This time, their mouths were stitched shut. And yet, across the glass in a trembling scrawl, "We're still speaking, just not with tongues." The next night, Sister Agnes was found standing barefoot in the snow, facing the twins' burial site. Her nightgown was soaked through, her hands clutched to her chest, as if protecting something fragile. When the others brought her inside, she offered no resistance. Just one phrase, repeated over and over in a childlike murmur. They knocked twice. Then they waited. The nurses checked her for signs of fever or delirium, but her pulse was steady, her skin cold but not frozen. She had no recollection of walking outside. That same night, the convent's statue of the Virgin, now partially covered in ivy, was found bleeding from the eyes. Not red, something black and tar-thick. Sister Corinne, upon touching it, immediately vomited and began to convulse. The fluid evaporated by morning, leaving behind streaks that would not wash away, even with lye and vinegar. The Mother Superior, desperate to restore order, summoned a traveling exorcist from Illinois, an older man named Father Dorian who had served missions in Haiti and Prague. Upon arriving, he refused to touch the nursery door, stating flatly, this place was not built on silence, it was built to muffle screams. He insisted the graves be unearthed before he would attempt anything. The sisters resisted at first, but when Sister Miriam collapsed during Vespers, blood pouring from her ears as she recited Hail Marys backward, they agreed. On the 12th morning since Ruth's arrival, the graves were exhumed. What they found was nothing. No coffins, no cloth, no remains, just soil, dense, compacted and warm, as if recently turned, as if something had left. The exorcist turned pale. This is no haunting, he whispered. It's a gestation. That night, Ruth vanished, her bed untouched, her window sealed shut from the outside. Only a single note remained on her pillow. They only needed my shape. In the chapel, the crucifix had been turned upside down, not violently, but carefully. As if repositioned by small, reverent hands. The exorcist left without finishing the rites. He said he had heard voices coming from beneath the chapel floor, speaking in perfect harmony, one voice higher, one lower. They weren't praying, he said, they were rehearsing. The sisters were no longer themselves. Silence, once the convent's way of worship, now felt like a shared agreement not to name what was unfolding around them. Meals went untouched. Prayers were stuttered. The chapel felt colder than the frost outside. At night, the walls seemed to breathe. Sister Eileen took to sleeping with her rosary clutched so tightly her palms bled. Yet each morning the beads would be gone, replaced with two small, flat pebbles shaped like tiny skulls. When she asked the others if they were playing a trick, no one answered. Some wouldn't even meet her gaze. Sister Martha began burning incense in every hallway, claiming the smoke kept them confused. She refused to specify who they were. One morning, her cell door was found nailed shut from the inside. When they finally broke it down, she was crouched in the corner, humming the lullaby Ruth used to sing. Her mouth was stuffed with soil. She survived, but would never speak again. That evening, an eerie event occurred that none of the sisters could explain. Every painting, icon, and crucifix in the convent had been rearranged, reversed, mirrored, or inverted. A portrait of the Madonna now faced the wall. A statue of Saint Michael had been turned completely backward, his sword missing. Only the image of the Sacred Heart remained untouched, but beneath it, etched into the wood of the altar in what looked like dried blood, were the words, "They remember being born." The Mother Superior, whose authority had begun to erode in the wake of so many unnatural signs, called for another bishop, but the telegram office in town claimed no messages had been received. When the convent's carriage was sent for a messenger, it returned with only the horse, its mane braided in a pattern none of the sisters recognized. That night, the nursery door opened by itself during evening prayer. Inside, the cradle was empty. In its place stood two wooden dolls, identical, facing each other. Each had a stitch where the mouth should be, and their hands were smeared with soil. Sister Agnes fainted. Sister Eileen began to scream, but Sister Miriam only wept quietly, repeating, "They found their way back in. The door was never meant to close." After the dolls appeared, the Mother Superior ordered the nursery to be sealed with bricks, an act not of restoration but of denial. The local mason they hired refused to step inside. When he approached the doorway, he said he felt the temperature drop 10 degrees and heard what he described as whispers from within the walls. He fled before laying the first stone. Undeterred, the sisters mixed the mortar themselves. Sister Agnes, too frail to lift the trowel, simply sat nearby, clutching her rosary and weeping. The nursery was bricked shut by nightfall, its only window covered in black cloth. But the following morning, the bricks had cracked from within. Just one word was scratched into the mortar, from the inside out, still. That same day, Sister Corinne found her Bible desecrated. Every instance of the word God had been carefully cut out. No torn pages, no mess, just perfect little holes where the name had been. She burned the book in the chapel furnace, but the next day, the ashes had been arranged into 2 tiny footprints across the floor. The sisters held a silent fast, hoping penitence might drive out whatever had rooted itself among them. But the fast only made their minds brittle. Sister Eileen confessed to hearing laughter echo through the chapel rafters at night, laughter in 2 tones, like a duet. Sister Martha, who had once been the most logical of them all, was found trying to dig through the stone floor beneath the altar using only her fingernails. She claimed they were buried too shallow. "I hear them breathe," she whispered, "and it's not just in dreams anymore." That night, every window in the convent frosted over, except one. Ruth's old room remained warm. Inside, a single candle burned on the windowsill. No one had lit it. Beneath it sat 2 feathers and a lock of braided hair. Sister Miriam insisted the twins were never meant for burial. "We performed the rites," she whispered to herself over and over, as if trying to convince someone else. But no one would say it out loud. Not yet, not until the bell rang again at 3:17 a.m. 12 perfect chimes, and all the sisters awoke at once, their mouths already open, already singing a lullaby none of them had ever learned. When morning came, none of the sisters could recall what they had sung, yet each of them woke with sore throats and dried blood beneath their tongues. Sister Agnes claimed to have dreamed of a hallway with no doors, where only the sound of babies crying guided her forward. Sister Eileen described floating above the convent, watching herself sleep. The most unsettling account came from Sister Miriam, who remembered kneeling in the chapel, blindfolded, as 2 cold hands guided her fingers across a page. When she awoke, the bedsheet beside her bore those same words written in ash, "We're almost whole." That day, a travelling monk arrived unannounced. Brother Caldus, gaunt and pale, said he had been summoned in dream by a voice calling from a place without wind. The Mother Superior, desperate, allowed him entry. He immediately asked to be taken to the twins' graves. When shown the garden, he stepped into the snow without shoes, knelt in silence, and began to pray in Latin so ancient that not even Sister Martha, fluent in church rites, could follow. At sunset, he stood and simply said, "They are not below, they never were." That night, the convent's dining hall chandelier shattered without warning. Glass embedded itself in the table, forming a perfect ring. Inside the ring, the dust that settled made the shape of 2 small handprints. Sister Eileen screamed. Sister Corinne fainted. The Mother Superior called for Brother Caldus, but he was nowhere to be found. His room was undisturbed, his cot unslept in. Yet on the wall, a prayer had been written in blood. "They were born of silence. They drink what's forgotten." The nuns began to whisper about closing the convent entirely, but even as the idea passed their lips, strange ailments took root. Nosebleeds, sudden rashes, dreams of drowning in dark soil. When Sister Martha tried to write a letter to the archdiocese, the ink in her pen ran dry after the word twins. The replacement pens did the same. When she resorted to carving the message into wood, the knife snapped clean in half. It was as if the very fabric of the convent rejected documentation, as if some force, some mind had decided there would be no record beyond memory, no escape beyond silence. The air inside the convent turned heavy, as though the walls themselves had grown lungs. Every breath the sisters took felt watched. The sound of pages turning, footsteps padding, and wood creaking no longer meant presence. They meant anticipation. At dusk, Sister Agnes began to refer to the unseen presence in plural. "They're waiting," she whispered, "but not for us, for her." When asked who, she would only glance toward Ruth's old room and mutter, "The hollow." That night, Sister Miriam dreamt of the garden, but it wasn't winter in the dream, it was spring. The grass was alive, too green, almost luminous. She walked barefoot to the burial mound. There, instead of 2 crosses, stood 2 boys, back turned. They were digging with their hands, faster than humanly possible. When she called out, they turned around. Their faces were blurred, spinning like wheels. She awoke to find soil beneath her fingernails and her feet damp with dew. The garden was still frozen solid. Inside the chapel, the crucifix had warped during the night. The wood curled like it had been under fire, and on the altar cloth, written in a child's handwriting, were the words, "She forgot our names, we didn't." That morning, Sister Corinne found every candle in the convent. Dozens of them had burned down at the exact same time. Each had left behind wax trails shaped like spirals. She tried to scrape them away, but where the wax had cooled, the floorboards had blackened. In the center of one spiral sat a tooth, small, baby-sized, unaccounted for. The sisters placed it in the reliquary, but the next morning it had vanished, replaced by two more. In desperation, the Mother Superior reopened the bricked nursery herself. Behind the last brick, they found not the cradle, not the dolls, but a mirror. Old, spotted with age, but intact. In its reflection, there was no room, no chapel, no bricks, only a tunnel of ear, leading downward, and at the end, two pale lights. Not flames, not eyes, something deeper. Sister Eileen slammed it shut, screaming that she had seen Ruth, naked, smiling, holding a child in each arm. But her eyes were mirrors, she sobbed, and in them I saw myself already buried. After the mirror was discovered, no one entered the nursery again. The Mother Superior ordered the doorway sealed a second time, but this time they used stone instead of brick, 3 layers deep, bound with salt and holy water. Still, it wasn't enough. On the third night after sealing, a low hum began to rise through the convent floorboards, vibrating like a faraway organ. The notes came in pairs, one high, one low, harmonizing like children in duet. Sister Martha awoke to find her mattress soaked, not in water, but in milk, curdled and warm. She screamed so loudly that several nuns thought the tower bell had been struck. In the hallway outside her room, 2 sets of wet footprints, bare, small, led from her door to the chapel. Inside, they found the tabernacle pried open, the Eucharist removed. In its place were 2 curled fingers, pale and dry as parchment. Sister Eileen fainted. When she awoke, her tongue was stiff, her voice paralyzed. That day, a letter finally arrived from the archdiocese. But when opened, it was blank, save for one sentence scrawled in the corner. "You buried breath, it does not stay buried." The Mother Superior collapsed. She was taken to the infirmary, where she slipped in and out of consciousness, muttering Latin that no one had taught her. One phrase, however, repeated, "Porta infra, porta infra." The door beneath. The phrase spread among the sisters like infection. They began to hear knocking from the basement floor at night. 2 knocks, always at 3:17 a.m., the same hour the bells first rang on their own. Sister Agnes insisted they had not buried bodies but gates. "Those boys weren't born still," she whispered. "They were born hollow. That's why they could carry something else." She died that night in her sleep, a peaceful smile on her face, but in her clenched hand was a drawing, scrawled in ink across torn parchment. It showed a woman, Ruth, naked. Arms outstretched, her abdomen hollowed like a gourd. Inside her chest sat 2 tiny figures, curled and eyeless, each with mouths stitched shut. Beneath the image were the same 3 words carved into the mirror's frame, "We never left." The sisters burned the paper, but the drawing reappeared on every wall the next morning, etched into frost. That morning, none of the sisters spoke during breakfast. They simply sat, staring at the frost-covered walls where the drawing had reappeared, over the stove, behind the crucifix, even etched faintly across the inside of teacups. Scraping it off only made it return darker, deeper, sharper. The Mother Superior, now bedridden and rambling, began whispering prayers backward. Sister Corinne attempted to anoint her with oil, but the moment the crucifix touched her forehead, the glass of the infirmary window shattered inward. No wind, no impact, just implosion, as if the very air inside had turned hostile. That night, the convent's library erupted in shrieking, not from voices, but from the books themselves. Psalters, Bibles, and catechisms flung open and flapped their pages violently, as though trying to take flight. The sisters watched in terror as their sacred texts twisted mid-air and collapsed into piles, each book now open to passages speaking of wombs, bloodlines, and names lost to God. One book, Sister Martha's personal devotional, was found torn to shreds beneath her bed, where she had stuffed her ears with cotton and refused to speak. On the walls of her cell, painted in soot, were the words, "Names are doors." Sister Eileen began asking the other nuns if they remembered Ruth's full name. No one could. It hadn't been written anywhere. The guestbook page for her arrival had been torn out. Even the burial record had been reduced to ash. "If we don't name her," Eileen muttered, "she can stay open. She's the vessel, the lock." That night, a storm rolled in, lightning but no thunder, wind but no trees stirred. In the courtyard, the statue of the Virgin Mary wept again, but this time the tears were white, milky. Sister Miriam touched the statue and collapsed, clutching her abdomen. When she was carried to the infirmary, the sisters lifted her robe to find her belly swollen, despite the fact she had not eaten in days. An image was forming on her skin, two tiny faces pressing against her from beneath, smiling, laughing. The midwife among them, Sister Corinne, tried to listen with a stethoscope, but dropped it with a scream. "It's not a heartbeat," she cried. It's whispering from inside." Then, as they watched, the image disappeared. The swelling faded, but Sister Miriam's eyes remained open, wide, glassy, and forever unblinking. The following dawn brought an eerie calm to the convent. Snow had fallen again in the night, blanketing the grounds in white silence. But there were no footprints, not human, not animal. Only two identical depressions beneath Ruth's window, each about the size of a child's foot, perfectly preserved in the powder. The sisters avoided the garden entirely now. The gravesite was no longer mentioned. No prayers were said for the dead. The chapel candles were never lit. Yet every morning, the hymnals were opened to the same page. Psalm 139, "You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made." A verse once meant for comfort, now echoing like a warning. Sister Eileen insisted the convent's original foundation held the key. She convinced two others to help her break into the cellar beneath the chapel. What they found wasn't a storage room. It was a crypt, sealed off long ago. No records mentioned it. The air was thick, dry, and strangely warm. In the center stood a stone table, covered in dust and a thin crust of what looked like old blood. Upon it sat two porcelain masks, one smiling, one frowning. Neither had eye holes. Beneath the table lay two child-sized indentations in the stone floor. Carved above them, "What is not born cannot die." Sister Eileen ran, sobbing. One of the others stayed behind too long and returned mute, her hair white as ash. From that day on, she refused to sleep, and when she did collapse from exhaustion, she awoke screaming, begging someone, anyone, to close the mouths. That night, the convent's tower bell rang just once. At exactly 3:17 a.m., Sister Corinne, unable to sleep, wandered into the hallway and saw candlelight flickering beneath the nursery door. The sealed stone wall remained intact, but the light passed through it, as though the barrier no longer mattered. Then she heard it, two voices singing, so oft and slow, in a language she didn't understand, one high, one low, harmony. She turned and fled, but not before the final note ended with a sound she recognized, Ruth's laugh, soft, joyful, and utterly wrong. Behind her, the hallway darkened, no flickering, no extinguishing, just absence, light erased, as though something had drawn breath from the very walls. By the 13th day, the sisters stopped referring to their home as a convent. No one dared to say St. Bellamy's aloud anymore. They spoke in fragments, coded phrases, half-finished prayers. Fear had reshaped their language. The very name of the place seemed cursed, as if speaking it would invite notice from something listening just beneath the skin of the walls. The bell tower remained silent during the day, yet rang once every night. Always 3:17, always without wind. Sister Martha, once composed and rational, began speaking to herself in mirrors. The others tried to hide the remaining reflective surfaces, but she would find them anyway. Puddles, spoons, windows. "They're learning to speak through me," she said, her voice flat. "But it's not language, it's pressure, a kind of wanting." That same afternoon, she gouged out her own eyes with a shard of ceramic from a broken communion plate. "They see too much," she mumbled before the others could restrain her. "They remember every womb they were denied." She survived, but her silence after that was absolute. Meanwhile, the frost on the convent windows began to form patterns, spirals at first, then paired figures, childlike in shape. They appeared only from the inside. Sister Miriam began sleepwalking again. The third time, she was found in the garden, standing barefoot at the graves, her hands folded like in prayer, though her lips were sewn shut with twine. No one admitted doing it. No one could explain how. When they removed the stitches, she screamed a single sentence before collapsing. "They're still gestating." Inside the chapel, something new appeared. A bassinet, hand-woven, pristine. No one knew where it came from. It rested near the altar, empty at first, but after evening prayers, it was found swaying. Inside, 2 stones, warm to the touch, each carved with a single word, "Begin" and "Again." The chapel doors were yet. Ear nailed shut that night, but the next morning they were open. The bassinet was gone. In its place sat Ruth's shawl, folded neatly, with soil clinging to the hem. Sister Corinne recognized the stitching. "It wasn't hers," she whispered. "It belonged to the mother house from 50 years ago." Yet no records showed any prior Ruth. No midwives, no twins, nothing. Just a ledger entry long faded, written in Latin. Infantes sine anima, retenti, infants without souls, retained. A cold, unlike any they had known, settled into the stone of the convent. Fires no longer warmed the halls. Breath lingered longer in the air. Even sunlight, when it came, felt brittle. Thin rays that illuminated nothing, like light passing through dirty glass. The sisters stopped gathering for meals. Most stayed to their cells, praying under blankets, listening to the creaks of the building as though trying to divine meaning in its shifting bones. Sister Corinne took to writing hourly confessions in her journal, but each morning the pages were blank, not torn, not erased, just clean. The ink itself gone, as if the paper had rejected memory. In desperation, she began carving prayers into her wooden floor. On the 4th night, her cell door jammed shut. The others heard the sound of scratching, not from within her room, but from beneath it. When they finally broke through, they found her slumped over, unconscious, her hands bloodied, her knees raw. She had carved a spiral into the floorboards so deep it exposed the soil beneath. In the center of that spiral, pressed into the dirt, lay 2 baby teeth, newly shed. That same evening, the convent's dogs, once kept for guarding the outer gates, howled and fled into the woods, never to return. The silence that followed was worse. Sister Eileen began hearing voices through the walls again, but this time they spoke her name, in pairs, one high, one low. Eileen, Eileen, always drawn out, always soft, like the start of a lullaby. When she blocked her ears with wax, the voices came through her dreams. In one, she saw herself cradling 2 infants. They looked like Ruth's twins, but as she leaned in, their faces changed into hers, mouths stretched wide, smiling, teeth like needles. When she awoke, her wrists were marked with 2 matching handprints burned into the skin, not bruises, burns. That night, the chapel's communion wine turned black. When Sister Miriam dipped her finger in and tasted it, she collapsed instantly. She screamed a single phrase before seizing violently. "There's no bottom, they go down forever." They locked her in the infirmary, but at dawn she was gone. No sign of exit, only the crucifix over her bed turned upside down and a trail of 2 footprints, wet and barefoot, leading back to the chapel. The sisters no longer spoke aloud. They communicated in glances, scribbled notes, and the occasional trembling nod. It wasn't fear of each other. It was fear of being heard. Something in the walls, in the floorboards, in the empty spaces between syllables had begun listening. Words were no longer safe. Sister Martha, blind and mute after her self-inflicted wounds, began scratching symbols into the pews with her fingernails. Spirals, twin circles, pairs of X's. They matched the patterns appearing each night in the frost across the windows, always drawn from inside. On the 15th night, the air turned sweet with rot. Sister Eileen followed the scent to the old laundry room, unused since before Ruth arrived. There, beneath the floorboards, they found something wrapped in cloth, 2 bundles. Inside each, a doll. identical to the ones that had first appeared in the nursery. Porcelain heads, thread-stitched eyes, mouths sewn shut with wire. One doll had a crack along the temple, through which a tooth had been embedded, real, baby-sized, white and perfect. The other had a heartbeat, faint, slow, but undeniably pulsing. Sister Corinne tried to destroy them. She poured oil, lit a match, and watched the fire lick around the cloth. But the flames turned cold, not extinguished, just wrong. The heat inverted, her breath steamed as if in reverse. She dropped the torch and fled. The dolls remained, unmoved. That night the remaining sisters huddled together in the great hall. No one suggested leaving. They knew there was nowhere to go. Outside the convent was just more cold, more silence, and something that waited in the woods, not to kill them, but to return them, to complete what had begun. At 3:17 a.m. the bell rang 13 times. The stone over the nursery buckled outward, cracking in the center. The mirror inside, somehow unbroken, reflected only one thing, a figure standing at the end of a tunnel. Ruth, holding two swaddled forms, her eyes pure black, her smile beatific. Behind her, the soil writhed as if breathing. Sister Martha, though blind, began laughing. When the others asked why, she said only, "They finished the song. That means the mouths can open." And outside, for the first time in weeks, something began to knock, twice, at every door. Simultaneously. The knocking stopped at sunrise, but the damage remained. Every door in the convent, wooden, iron, even hidden cupboard latches, was found ajar, none visibly forced. Inside each room, something had changed. Crucifixes had inverted themselves, candles had melted into spirals, and personal items, rosaries, veils, letters, were missing. In their place, small objects had been left, milk teeth, locks of hair tied in pairs, scraps of parchment with the same 4 words, "We were not done." The Mother Superior, who had not spoken coherently in days, awoke suddenly and ordered every mirror, reflective surface, and polished icon removed or shattered. "They're watching through glass," she croaked, "and when the eyes open, it will be too late." The sisters complied, smashing wash basins and silverware, even breaking the windows and nailing up burlap over the frames. Still, each night brought new signs. The frost on the burlap etched itself with twin spirals. The sound of cradles rocking echoed from within walls where no rooms existed. When Sister Eileen tried to paint over the spirals with holy oil, her brush stiffened mid-stroke, and the wall beneath it sighed, not groaned, sighed. As if tired, as if breathing. The sisters began to suffer visions, not dreams, memories they had never lived. Sister Corinne saw herself giving birth in a cold field, snow falling, blood steaming, the twins lifting themselves from her womb and whispering, "We borrowed her, we return through you." Sister Martha, though blind, described the same scene in perfect detail, down to the color of the sky. Sister Miriam, still missing, began appearing in their visions too. Her skin bloated, her limbs bending in impossible ways, her voice split into 2 tones that chanted lullabies backward. The Mother Superior attempted one final mass. She entered the chapel alone and locked the door behind her. For an hour, all was silent. Then the organ began to play by itself, softly, perfectly in tune. When the sisters broke open the door, they found her collapsed on the altar, eyes wide open, mouth sewn shut with her own rosary. Her hands were clutched around 2 stones, each marked with the same letter carved into the nursery cradle long ago. Ah. And though she was clearly dead, a faint sound still escaped her sealed lips. 2 voices, humming, one high, one low, a lullaby. They buried the Mother Superior in silence. There was no priest, no prayer, no Latin rites, only snow and the sound of the shovel splitting the earth like a wound. Her grave was dug far from the garden, near the woods, where the sisters hoped whatever haunted them would not follow. But the next morning her grave was open, no signs of disturbance, no footprints, no body. In her place lay a single item, a mirror, round and old, fogged in the center, its frame etched with repeating words, "We are not beneath, we are within." Sister Corinne tried to cover it with salt, but the grains melted into the glass like water. When she turned the mirror face down and tried to bury it, it cracked, and blood began to pool inside the fracture. That night, the mirror reappeared on the altar, unbroken, waiting, The sisters stopped entering the chapel entirely. It was no longer sacred ground, it was a reflection chamber, a place where something rehearsed its way into flesh. The bell no longer rang at 3:17, now it chimed at all hours, sometimes once, sometimes 13 times, sometimes not at all. The sound no longer came from the tower, it came from beneath the floor. Sister Martha, still blind, now claimed she could see more clearly than ever. She began painting with her fingers, using ashes and milk left by the fire. Her works depicted Ruth holding the twins, but the background was always wrong. Sometimes it was the nursery, sometimes it was the inside of the sisters' cells, sometimes it was the viewers' own rooms. "They're rehearsing their births," she muttered. "Every place you remember is a place they can try." She handed Sister Eileen one final painting, a mirror with two faces pressed against the glass, mouths open, teeth sharp. The caption beneath it read, "Wherever you reflect, we arrive." They smashed every remaining polished surface. Still, the images returned, now in shadows, now in steam. Reflections no longer needed mirrors. One sister claimed she saw the twins in the surface of her tea. Another wept after finding their faces blinking up from her soup spoon. In the convent's final days, light itself seemed to reflect wrong, bending backward, clinging to corners, showing shapes that were no longer there, or perhaps had never left. By the 18th night, no one slept. Sleep was no longer a refuge, it was an invitation. Every time the sisters closed their eyes, they awoke with scratches across their abdomen, bruises on their inner thighs, soil between their toes. One nun whispered that she dreamed of giving birth with her mouth, not her body. Another said she could feel fingers curling beneath her ribs when she prayed too hard. Sister Eileen began vomiting feathers, soft, grey, hair thin. The physician summoned from town lasted less than 10 minutes inside the convent. He entered Ruth's room, now sealed with chains, and left running. He refused to explain what he saw, only said, "That room is older than the building, older than me." When asked his age, he couldn't remember. That night, the snow melted in the garden, only in the garden. The rest of the grounds remained frozen, but there, above the twins' graves, grass grew green, vibrant, almost luminous, and something had begun to move beneath it, slow, rhythmic pulses, as if the earth was breathing. Sister Martha dropped to her knees and began to sing, not the lullaby, but a hymn no one recognized. The language was foreign, older than Latin, but her voice was clear and bright. "It's their names," she said afterward. "Their true ones, not what we gave them, what they carried before flesh." When asked how she knew, she simply pointed to the cracks in the nursery wall and said, "They told me, in the dark, when they took my eyes." That same night, the convent's front gates were found wide open. No footprints led in, but inside the vestibule, 2 cloaks hung, child-sized, sewn from burlap and silk, one stained with milk, the other blood. The candle above them refused to extinguish. The flame curved unnaturally, flickering toward the floor. Sister Corinne collapsed upon seeing them, clutching her stomach and weeping. "They're coming dressed." That phrase. It would be repeated by others over the next day. Some wrote it in chalk on their walls, others carved it into the floorboards. One nun etched it into her skin. "They're coming dressed, not born, not summoned, just arriving, dressed in our memories, wearing our fears, with names we forgot the moment they first knocked." By the 19th day, time itself seemed to unravel within St. Bellamy's. Clocks stopped, shadows moved against the direction of the sun, candles burned without heat. At one point, the sisters watched snow fall upward through the cracks in the chapel ceiling. Some began to question whether they were still in Indiana at all, or if the convent had shifted into something else, a place adjacent to time, waiting for a birth that defied nature. Sister Martha, still painting with fingers blackened by ash and soot, completed a mural across the infirmary ceiling. It depicted not a crucifixion but a delivery, 2 identical infants emerging from the mouth of a weeping nun. The cord between them was not flesh but chain. Each twin held the end of it, pulling tighter as the nun's mouth stretched wide in agony. Beneath the image, she scrawled the phrase, "God cannot hear through soil." When asked what it meant, she simply turned her head and said, "He stopped listening when the womb was borrowed." That night, the convent organ began playing by itself again, only now it played backwards. Sister Corinne found the score open to an unfamiliar composition. The title, Cantus Partus Inversus, the inverted song of birth. As the notes echoed through the halls, mirrors, long since shattered, began to hum, their fragments rattling against the floor. One shard levitated from the chapel floor and floated to the altar. It reflected nothing. Not the room, not the sisters, just a black tunnel, pulsing. In that moment, all of them heard it, 2 breaths in perfect harmony, exhaling. Then, a whisper, not spoken, but understood. "We remember the blood." Sister Eileen screamed and ran to the bell tower, determined to ring it herself, to break the pattern. But when she reached for the rope, her hands passed through it like smoke. The bell itself shimmered, then faded from sight, not broken, not moved, erased. Down below, in the nursery's sealed wall, hairline fractures began to appear in the stone, not from pressure, from within, like something was pushing out, gently, patiently, as if testing its strength or perhaps savoring the final moments before its return. By the time the 20th night arrived, the sisters no longer recognized each other. Their faces remained, their habits intact, but something behind the eyes had shifted, an uncanny sameness, like one mind beginning to ripple across many bodies. Sister Corinne, once the most steadfast, had taken to speaking in riddles, often responding to questions with sentences that mirrored back the words spoken to her. "Why are you afraid?" one nun asked. "Why are you afraid?" she replied, with the exact inflection, eyes blank. In the chapel, the mural on the infirmary ceiling began to spread on its own. What was once soot and paint now bubbled like ink across the plaster, bleeding into the walls, dripping down like veins. Sister Martha was found seated in the middle of the chapel, cross-legged, cradling something invisible. "They're rehearsing still," she whispered. "Every scream we've ever swallowed, they learned them first." The soil in the garden, still vibrant and warm, now pulsed audibly at night. One nun claimed she saw it rise and fall like a sleeping chest. Birds no longer flew overhead, even insects avoided the grounds, and in the shadows, twin silhouettes began appearing. At first, only in the corners of vision, then clearer, more defined, pale children standing just beyond candlelight, always holding hands, always smiling. When Sister Eileen attempted to speak to them, her mouth filled with water. She choked, gasped, and fell unconscious. When she awoke, she was humming the lullaby again. But the words, now audible, had changed. "We were never named, we are always yours." That line would become the refrain of every whispered nightmare that followed. At dawn, 2 more dolls appeared. This time, they were made of bone. One held a string, the other, a key. The key fit no door in the convent. Yet when placed near the sealed nursery wall, the fractures widened, dust poured from the cracks, and beneath it, a heartbeat, real, steady, echoing like thunder muffled through cloth. Sister Martha began to weep. "This is the 21st knock," she said. "That's the number of gestation. The door doesn't open from outside." She stood, walked to the chapel doors, and whispered, "We're the birth canal now." Then she opened them, and the wind that followed screamed like every child who had never been allowed to be born. The scream didn't fade. It echoed through the convent long after the wind died, bouncing between stone and memory, shaking dust from beams, setting the walls to a low animal hum. Sister Corinne dropped to her knees as the sound vibrated in her spine, the same way a mother might feel the foot of a child kicking from inside. But this wasn't joy, it was recognition. She wept, not from pain, but from the dawning realization that it was her voice folded into the scream, her breath, her grief, her lost name returned. All the sisters heard it, all felt it, a scream stitched together from every forgotten cry the convent had buried, every infant stillborn, every unspoken confession, every vow of silence broken by blood. In that moment, the nursery wall cracked fully, a single stone dislodged and fell inward, revealing absolute darkness beyond. Not a room, not a tunnel, a corridor of silence so total it made the scream feel like a lullaby. The mirror inside the nursery began to pulse with dull, wet light. No reflection, just a rippling membrane, like skin stretched across glass. Sister Eileen approached it, entranced, and placed her hand against its surface. Her breath caught. "It's warm," she whispered, and, "it's breathing." Then the mirror responded. 2 hands pushed from the other side, small, perfect, identical, pressed palm to palm against hers. Behind them, 2 faces formed in the blur, eyes closed, mouths stitched. But as she watched, the mouths twitched, the stitches unraveling like silk threads pulled loose by breath. The sisters backed away, gasping, some praying, others frozen. Sister Martha fell to the floor, chanting in a forgotten tongue. The Mother Superior's journal, long abandoned, flipped open on its own, pages fluttering like wings. It stopped on a blank page. Ink bled through from nowhere, forming one line. "Where 2 are buried, many are born." Then the era shattered, not outward, but inward, sucked into the darkness like glass devoured by wind. The pulse grew louder, steadier, and now every surface in the convent, from wood to skin to snow outside, throbbed with rhythm, not a heartbeat, a countdown. And just beneath that hum, for the first time in this long descent, came a knock, not on wood, not on stone, but on every door simultaneously. The doors didn't open, not yet, but the knock was not a request, it was a promise. The sound echoed through the convent with impossible consistency, striking every threshold with the same weight, same rhythm, same intent. 2 knocks, a pause, then 2 again. It wasn't meant to be answered, it was meant to remind them. The door had never been closed. Sister Eileen, shaking, traced the sound to the chapel entrance, pressing her ear against the wood. Her pupils dilated. "It's them," she whispered, "but they're not outside, they're echoing through us." That phrase repeated among the sisters in the hours that followed. Through us, not behind, not beneath, not from beyond, within. That night, the walls of St. Bellamy's began to sweat. A clear fluid seeped from the stone in thin, glistening streaks. Where it pooled, tiny forms took shape, coiled, translucent, like larvae suspended in oil. When touched, they dissolved, leaving behind the scent of milk and blood. Sister Martha tried to collect one in a chalice, but the vessel cracked, and the fluid hissed like steam on stone. "They're being born again," she muttered. But this time, not through flesh, through memory. In the cells, the sisters began finding pages from books they had never read, stories of twins born in silence, of mothers who hummed but never held, of mirrors that swallowed names. Each story ended with the same phrase, "The second womb is forgetting." And yet none of the sisters could remember reading the pages once they looked away. They disappeared as quickly as they appeared, burned into thought and gone from sight. At sunrise, the bell rang once more. This time it was not metal but bone. The sound was dry, hollow, and unmistakably organic. From the bell tower, no rope hung. Instead, 2 child-sized hands gripped the beam, their nails blackened, their knuckles bloodless. One curled a finger and beckoned. Just once. The motion was enough to crack the marble font in the chapel. Inside the cracked basin, Sister Corinne found a note, waterlogged but legible. Not twins, one soul, twice born, and now, returning. Sister Eileen could no longer speak. Her tongue had withered into a spiral, as if reshaped by what she refused to name. When she pointed to the nursery wall, the other sisters knew. They had never sealed it. They had sealed themselves in. At dawn, the sisters gathered in the refectory, not to eat, but to face one another. It was the first time in days any of them had made direct eye contact. They no longer looked like women of God. Their skin was pallid, their eyes sunken, their hands trembling from prayers that no longer held power. They stared not in fear, but in surrender. Sister Martha spoke first. "It's not about the twins, it never was. They're just the faces we gave it." The sisters did not argue. They understood. What had entered through Ruth had no name, no face, no age. It was not a demon. It was a rhythm, a force older than scripture and outside the reach of salvation. A hunger that borrowed twins because mirrors come in twos. In the silence, Sister Corinne pulled a nail from the floorboard and pried open her prayer book. Inside, the pages had fused into a solid block, etched only with 2 words burned into the center. "Open us." Sister Eileen, who hadn't spoken in 3 days, finally opened her mouth and let out not words but a chorus. 2 voices again, one high, one low. They sang the lullaby in reverse, and as they did, every candle in the convent flared blue. The frost vanished from the windows, revealing a garden in bloom, green and red and twitching. In the chapel, the mural on the ceiling began to peel, not crumble, peel, like skin sloughing off to reveal another layer beneath. The painting underneath depicted not birth, not death, but invitation. The twins, smiling, holding open a curtain. Behind it, nothing, or worse, everything that was never meant to be named. Sister Martha screamed and ran, but the hallways twisted. St. Bellamy's no longer obeyed the rules of architecture. Doors led to staircases that looped, cellars that rose upward, windows that looked in rather than out. Time fractured. One sister aged 20 years in a single hour. Another regressed to a childlike stupor. Murmur. Ring only, don't let them finish the song. But it was too late. The lullaby had begun echoing from the walls themselves, from water, from breath. The convent had become a womb, and its final contractions were beginning. As Sister Corinne pressed her ear to the nursery wall, she didn't flinch when it began to beat. She only smiled. They've found a mother. The garden outside St. Bellamy's bloomed in defiance of winter. The soil, black and steaming, pulsed with every beat behind the nursery wall. Flowers unfamiliar to the region, wide-mouthed, red-throated things, opened in pairs and bled from their centers. Birds did not land. The sky above the convent grew still. Even the snow refused to fall where the earth had become a cradle. Inside, Sister Martha traced the nursery door with a fingertip, following the lines of the cracks as though mapping veins. "This is not a door," she whispered. "It's a cervix." The sisters no longer prayed to God. They didn't blaspheme. There was no rebellion in them, only surrender, as if something inside them had been returned to the thing they were always meant to be: tools, carriers, echo chambers for a voice that had waited too long to speak. When Sister Corinne poured salt around the nursery door in a final act of resistance, it dissolved into steam before touching the floor. The temperature dropped. The lights failed. For 33 minutes, no time passed. The clocks stopped. Breaths held. And when time returned, the convent smelled of afterbirth. Sister Eileen began to bleed from her ears. Her skin grew warm, then cold, then translucent. Beneath it, they saw movement, twins, pressing against her like shadows. She looked up and smiled. I remember their names now, but when asked what they were, she opened her mouth, and only breath came. 2 perfect exhalations, no sound, yet every nun present heard the same words in their minds. We were never born, we were remembered. That phrase repeated in dreams, in candle flickers, in the tremble of chapel stone. Every object in the convent rearranged itself into symmetry. Tables split down the middle, crucifixes flipped until paired, statues stood hand in hand, books turned to blank pages, then rewrote themselves in twos. Even the chapel pews shift into pairs facing one another, as if the congregation was meant to look inward. The sisters found comfort in the structure, the duality. They stopped asking questions. They began humming, in sleep, in waking. It wasn't the lullaby anymore, it was something else, slower, deeper, the sound of breathing in unison, not among themselves, but with something else, something ancient, something born not once, but always. The final days of St. Bellamy's were never officially recorded. No documents survive, no letters reached the Vatican, and no relics were ever recovered. What we know comes from fragments, testimonies from distant relatives, old maps that no longer mark the land, and the few remaining oral traditions whispered by townspeople who no longer point toward the woods. But they remember, in hushed tones, they say the trees near the old convent bend slightly outward, as if recoiling from what still lingers at the center. Inside, Sister Eileen took to the chapel floor and began constructing a circle from bone, not human, not animal, bones that had never known flesh, each arranged in mirrored patterns, ribs across ribs, vertebrae stacked like twins. When completed, the circle pulsed once and then vanished from sight, leaving only a scent of milk and smoke. That night, all the sisters gathered in the infirmary without speaking. Each one knew where to go. Each one held an item: rosaries, baby shoes, curls of hair, burnt scraps of parchment. They stood in 2 lines, mirror images, and faced the sealed nursery. Sister Martha held the key. Not a convent key, this one had grown from her hand overnight, curled from bone and tissue, carved in pairs of loops. She didn't question it, she only walked forward. The lock accepted it. The door, which had once been sealed in stone, opened not with a creak, but a sigh. A warm gust passed through them all, and every candle in the building lit at once. Inside the nursery, the cradle had returned, not old, not burned, not empty. 2 infants lay inside, eyes closed, mouths stitched with gold thread. But when the sisters stepped into the room, their eyes opened, not black, not white, but mirrored. Every sister who looked into them saw their own face, smiling back, younger, hollow. The twins sat up, took each other's hands, and began to hum. It was not a lullaby. It was not a hymn. It was the same breathing rhythm that had haunted them for weeks, but now with voices. The Mother Superior's voice, Ruth's voice, their own, folded and blended until all distinction collapsed. The last record ever etched on the convent walls read simply, 2 were buried, 1 became many, and many became 1. When the twins began to hum, the convent itself responded. The walls pulsed once, and then again, like lungs taking breath for the first time. Dust fell from the rafters. The floor swelled beneath their feet. Every door in St. Bellamy's, even those nailed shut and bricked over, opened in unison. The bells in the tower, long vanished, rang without form, their sound thick and wet, like chimes submerged under water. And the nuns, every one of them, began to sing, not a chant, not a song of fear, but a harmony of return. They stood in a circle around the twins, their mouths open, voices layered with joy and despair in equal measure. Some wept, some smiled, and others swayed gently, as if rocked by unseen hands. The air grew heavy with moisture, and the room filled with the scent of soil and amniotic fluid. Sister Martha's eyes, long scarred and unseeing, rolled back into color, vivid, unnatural green. She looked directly at the twins, bowed her head, and whispered, "It's time." No one asked for what, no one needed to. One by one, the sisters knelt, their hands placed gently on the floor, which had begun to soften beneath them, turning to loam, warm and fragrant. From the nursery walls, dozens of tiny arms emerged, not threatening, not grasping, but tender. They reached for hands, for veils, for hair. The touch of them made the sisters tremble, not from fear, but from recognition. These were not strangers. These were them, in some older, deeper form, selves never born, selves remembered only by the body. Outside, the garden bloomed in red, the snow evaporated in great sighs of steam, revealing flowers that pulsed with every beat from within the convent. Some villagers claimed they saw the sky ripple that night, as if time had folded above the steeple. Others said they heard singing where no building stood. The next morning, St. Bellamy's was gone. Not destroyed, not burned, gone. The field where it had stood was unbroken, the grass smooth and wet, save for 2 perfectly symmetrical depressions in the soil, and in the center, a cradle, empty, waiting, covered in frost. Beneath it, carved into stone too old for tools, one phrase remained, "Return comes in twos." In the weeks that followed the disappearance of St. Bellamy's, the nearby town of Dalton Falls reported strange phenomena. Children, especially twins, began waking with the same dream. A dark hallway, candlelit, with a humming that came from nowhere and everywhere at once. They'd describe a woman at the end of it, her eyes mirrors, her voice a lullaby they hadn't been taught but could sing word for word. The parents, frightened, took their children to priests, to doctors, to folklorists. Nothing could explain it. Then came the drawings, identical sketches made by unrelated children in different homes, always 2 boys, always holding hands, sometimes smiling, sometimes not. Behind them a garden bloomed out of season, and above them floated a word none of the children could pronounce. Just lines, spirals, shapes, a language no one recognized but everyone feared. The local cemetery, unused for over a decade, became active again, not from burials, but from disturbances. Graves that had long since settled cracked open, not dug, not vandalized, opened from within, and at each site, investigators found the same thing, 2 small footprints facing outward, nothing stolen, nothing left, just signs of emergence. Some of the townsfolk, mostly the old, began whispering that this had happened before, that St. Bellamy's wasn't the first building to vanish. that long ago there had been a chapel, a hospital, even a plantation house, each absorbed into silence after the appearance of a pair of unnamed infants, always twins, always stillborn, always followed by singing in the soil. One retired gravedigger admitted he'd buried 4 sets of unnamed children in his time, and each time something had changed in the air. A stillness, a waiting. He didn't remember their faces, only that the coffins were always warm to the touch. Local clergy tried to calm the town, but even the priests spoke their sermons faster, as if trying to outrun something they didn't understand. Bells began ringing at odd hours in churches that had no towers, and in the reflection of holy water, some said they could see 2 figures standing behind them, small, patient, and always smiling. People stopped baptizing their twins. The town began to whisper again of soil, of breath, of a cradle hidden beneath the roots. Return comes in 2s, they said, and the second is always for us. The government arrived a month later, quietly, without headlines, without uniforms, just a small team in an unmarked van carrying soil probes, radiation meters, and aerial drones. They scanned the field where St. Bellamy's once stood, took samples from the roots that now spiraled into the earth like veins, and photographed the cradle that still sat at the exact center of the clearing. One of the men, a geologist according to locals, attempted to lift the cradle. He screamed the moment his fingers touched it, not from pain, but from recognition. "My mother sang this to me," he whispered, though his lips bled from the pressure. "Before I was born, before I was her." The others restrained him, but by then, it was too late. The humming had already started again, through their equipment, through their headphones, even through the motors of their drones. 2 tones, one high, one low. Perfect harmony, impossible to isolate. They left that night, saying nothing. 3 of them resigned the next day. 1 disappeared. The cradle remained untouched. The field was fenced off, officially marked as unstable terrain. Yet no one who visits feels unsteady. They feel drawn. Pilgrims began arriving from across the country, not religious, not seekers, just people plagued by the same dreams, endless corridors, flickering candles, the pressure of small hands against their ribs. Many were twins, others were mothers who had lost children, some were neither, but simply felt emptier than they should. They brought offerings, baby shoes, hair ribbons, pages from hymnals burned around the edges. The offerings disappeared overnight. Every morning, new flowers bloomed, always in pairs. The town of Dalton Falls began to empty. Stores closed. Roads grew over. It wasn't a mass migration. It was erosion, the kind that comes when people forget to be afraid. The only thing left behind was a sign, posted near the field's edge. No one claimed to have written it. Hand-painted in red, it read, "If you look into them, they will remember you." Beneath it, someone scrawled a second line, shakier, "If they remember you, they come in through the breath." And now, even those who never knew the convent wake in the dark, breathing just a little harder, listening for footsteps too small to make sound. In the years that followed, St. Bellamy's became something no map could capture. It existed not as a place, but as a rhythm, a hum passed between generations in lullabies no one remembered learning. Mothers in nearby counties began to report strange behaviors in their children. Infants born with perfectly synchronized heartbeats, even when delivered hours apart. Toddlers who stared into mirrors and asked who the other me was. Siblings who spoke to empty cradles as though someone were sleeping inside. And in each case, always the same question, spoken without prompt. When will they be born again? The medical community dismissed it as hysteria, mass psychosis, even viral suggestion. But one midwife, retired and nearing 90, finally spoke out. She had once worked a birth near Dalton Falls. The child had died in utero, or so she thought. "I swear I heard breathing," she said. 2 sets, one calm, one waiting. Her story triggered others. Old nurses, nuns long since defrocked, and hospice workers who recalled dreams of twins pressing their palms against their own from the other side of glass. "They were never gone," one whispered, "only rehearsing." And now they were ready. Across the country, sightings increased, not of children, but of paired silhouettes, in fog, in reflections, in ultrasound images that showed two forms when only one was expected. No institutions officially documented these occurrences, but private forums exploded with posts, threads titled, "My son says his brother lives in the mirror," or "My daughter hums in harmony with the radio, but only when it's static," or simply, "I dreamed of the cradle again." Some postings disappeared within hours, others were copied, reposted, whispered about, but one message always returned, always anonymous, always the same. Two were buried, one became many, and many became one. They will be born through memory, not blood. It was around this time that the field where St. Bellamy's once stood became inaccessible, not closed, not fenced, just unreachable. Maps glitched, GPS spun, roads redirected. Even the townsfolk who lived beside it could no longer remember the path, but they remembered the sound, the two tones, humming, rising, and they remembered to never say the names, because once the twins are remembered, the second womb opens, and the breath that follows is never yours. There is no record of what the twins truly were, no names, no origin, no written account that survived unaltered. But across the United States, the echoes remain. Empty towns, families with twin headstones but only one birth certificate, churches where the mirrors have all been painted black, and every so often, when the wind is just right, the sound returns, soft, steady, two notes rising and falling in perfect unison. Some call it a hallucination, others claim it's the earth itself, remembering something buried too deep. But a few know better. The ones who wake at 3:17 a.m., gasping, the imprint of small hands on their chests. The ones who find footprints in the frost, perfectly side by side, stopping at the edge of the bed. The ones who no longer see themselves in the mirror, only a younger version, smiling back, holding the hand of someone just outside the frame. These people do not speak of it. They grow silent, withdrawn, not from fear, but from preparation, because they understand St. Bellamy's was never destroyed, it was reabsorbed into memory, into song, into breath, and the twins, whatever they are, do not need a place to be born, they only need to be remembered, a story told, a face glimpsed, a name nearly spoken, that's all it takes. And so, the cycle continues, not in fire or blood, but in lullabies and mirrored eyes. The second womb is open now, not sealed by stone, not guarded by faith, but wide as a dream and silent as a prayer long since forgotten. If you've read this far, if your breath has ever matched the rhythm, 2 beats, pause, 2 beats again, then they've already found you. You won't hear the knock, you'll feel it, from inside, and when you look into the mirror tonight, and your reflection doesn't blink when you do, don't ask its name. Don't ask who it's holding hands with, just out of sight. You've already invited them, through breath, through fear. Through the oldest cradle of all, your memory, because they were never buried, because they were never born, because they are always coming, in twos.